Sorry, Jordan, are we recording? Awesome. Okay, well, let's get this party started. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much to the Bell and Torch Justice for presenting and Siegel for pulling us together. GBC members, thank you so much. We're going to do a quick round of introductions so that everybody knows who's in the room. And we can start with the people on the phone as well. I just want to make sure you can hear and see the presentation. Everybody?
Sure can.
I can hear just fine, yeah.
Great, awesome. Okay, and huge thanks to Karen and Jordan from Team GBC for doing the legwork. We were all calling through all of our members that we thought should be in the room today. Obviously, between the people on the phone and here, there's a lot more of our membership who needs this information, so that's why we're recording it, so that we can make sure that our partner organizations who sponsored this, Sistahpreneurs and Mobilize Us and Joylab,
Worklife Partnerships.
And Worklife Partnerships also help spread the word about this, and we'll make sure that all of those organizations, as well as all of our members who are not in the room, get the link to the presentation, because that's really important information that everybody has. And so thank you for helping us to get a better understanding on what exactly the current law is for the minimum wage ordinance and what's being considered. Scott with CDLE is also in the room. So thank you for joining us, Scott. And let's go ahead and start with you, Jesse, if you don't mind. We'll do intros, just your business, how many employees you employ, what industry you're in, and then we'll move to people on the phone.
Sure, my name is Jessie Berg. I am Sistahpreneurs. We are an edible, sustainable landscaping company focusing on low water, low maintenance landscapes. And we had 2 year-round employees here and 8 seasonal staff.
Hey, Elliot Williams, Siegel for Affairs. We actually just helped put on the presentation. Thanks everybody for coming. Jordan, Suzuki, Business, Colorado. Part of helping put on the presentation.
I'm Hazel Smith. My company is Smart Service Accounting. I do accounting and local taxes. I'm looking to hire my first employee this tax season.
I would also love to know, and I imagine, like, if in your experience, since you work with so many businesses, if people come to you with questions about what they're supposed to be compensating people, or if you ever hear from your clients that there's confusion around the minimum wage ordinance.
Most of my clients are self-employed, so it's more their work and, making sure they're reporting salaries and so forth. Not so much that.
Thank you.
I'm Jimmy Bird from Colorado. We have 15 people at our place, and none that would really be directly affected by this, but my hope is to raise things up that I can pay them.
Hi everyone, my name is Alejandro Flores Munoz. I am a local food truck owner, business owner here, catering and food truck. I have 3 to 6 part-time employees year round, depending on what kind of gigs we get. And I'm a member of Business Colorado.
Hey, I'm Karen Moldovan. I'm the Director of Policy at Business Colorado. I've been on board a couple months, and yeah, thanks for the conversation.
I'm Scott Moss, Director of Division of Labor Standards and Statistics at the Labor Department. To put this on, I have about 16 years.
Everything going on. You've already
Justice. We're a nonprofit law firm that principally litigates around a lot of these issues. So we help support workers whose rights may have been violated. We're doing some advocacy on what has been called the Colorado minimum wage order, but I think will be called something different going forward, and I'm really eager to talk to you about it. We have six employees. With part-time, it's a little bit more, but it gets complicated, as you guys all know.
Great. I'm Tyler Jekyll. I'm the Director of Policy Research for the Bell Policy Center, and we work on policy issues primarily related to economic mobility, but in this context, been working on both overtime and minimum wage issues for several years now. We're an organization of about 10, and actually had to look into a lot of these issues, especially as we'll get into later, the Obama rule was going into effect at a certain point.
My name is Annie Contractor. I run a business called Worklife Partnership, which is about reaching equity in the workplace of pay.
And let's go to on the phone. Judy?
Okay, it's Judy Amabile, and I formerly owned Polar Bottles, and we had 65 full-time employees. More than half of them were hourly. When Obama put forward the overtime rules change at the end of his administration, we changed what we were doing to comply with those rules and transferred some people from hourly to salary. And then they didn't get implemented. And I'm very much in favor of seeing that we make some changes on these overtime rules to lift people up.
Jade?
Thanks. Jade Baranski. I am the CEO of Joylab and one of the owners of Mobilize Us. And we are in kind of the digital space mainly. We also do branding and development. And between the two companies, we have 5 full-time salaried employees, all of whom are on the same salary. So we have a transparent and super equitable setup for that. But we're looking at hiring some admin support and very interested in what that will look like with the kind of wage requirements and why I'm really interested in this conversation.
Awesome. Who else do we have on the phone?
This is Tracy.
Oh, Tracy, thank you.
I have a small business. It's a retail paint your own pottery store, and I have 8 employees.
Hey, do we have anyone else on the phone?
And just a note, Tracy's in Colorado, right? So you know, we talked about the regional.
Great. Thanks everybody for joining. Sarah, should I flip her?
No.
Oh, up here, that's fine.
I can stand up there if you want.
No. I like that. I like to stand in front of the crowd. Is this 8 foot wide? Oh, wow, okay. There you go. Maybe you should have told me that, Jordan. Now I'm like, the world is watching. Really, the heat is on now. We're really excited to talk to everyone. Sorry, did you have something? Or?
Is that okay?
Oh yeah, no, that's great. That's awesome. We're really excited to talk to folks about what has been called the Colorado minimum wage order, some of the advocacy that we're doing. In particular, knowing that the conversation, obviously, we're on Facebook Live. This is an entirely confidential conversation, but I would really be interested in having. No. I think that I would really be interested in answering people's questions about it, about anything that may be coming up for you all. And some of these things are complicated. I know that Good Business Colorado on some wage issues have been involved, for example, on minimum wage. I think that minimum wage issues are super important, and we have benefited. The state has benefited a ton from your guys' involvement. But those issues are sometimes a little bit easier to understand for business owners. So in particular on the salary basis question and what it means and who might be exempt from overtime, we're very interested I think that good businesses are such an important part of all of these conversations. Responsible businesses, I think that obviously we're really excited that you all have taken, the people in this room, the people who are members of GVC, have taken a really active role in a lot of these conversations. As you know, there are many, many thousands of other employers out there who might not be involved in GVC, but are also like good, responsible employers who are trying to do right by their workers. And we want, of course, to get them more involved. I'm sure that's something that you all are working on. But really, we are talking about a small sliver of the labor market that isn't interested in doing right by their workers in all of these ways. One of my favorite calls as an attorney at Towards Justice came a few years ago when I got a call from a drywall contractor who said, I read about you in a case that you guys did in the Denver Post, and I desperately want you to do more of those. Like, please do more of those. Like, I am getting squeezed. I can't get a contract if I properly classify people. And he also went out of his way to say, look, I'm not doing this out of the goodness of my heart. I got hit by a Department of Labor enforcement action, a U.S. Department of Labor enforcement action, and I have to properly classify these people, right? Like, we need more enforcement. And he had actually apparently been calling the Department of Labor for years and had never gotten through to anyone, trying to get them to do more. And he's like, the first person that picked up the phone is, you guys, right? And he actually thought that I could help him sue some of his competitors, right, for violations of wage and hour laws, effectively, which is a whole separate conversation. Maybe you ought to be able to, but you can't now. Anyway, the bottom line is we all know that, like, we want to do right by our workers, and to be competitive in this labor market, we want to make sure we're treating workers well and complying with the law. So we're going to talk about some pretty technical stuff under the Colorado minimum wage order. Very interested in answering any questions. I'm going to go through some of the background stuff and the question of what industries are covered under the wage order pretty quickly, and focus more on the salary basis issue. So meaning who has to be paid overtime. But please interrupt me if you have any questions. Here's an overview. There's tons. The wage laws are complicated. There's a lot of them. There's under federal, state, constitutional, state statute, state regulatory law. We may be adding city law to the mix, as folks are probably aware, in Denver and likely elsewhere in the future. The key point here, though, is that understanding state law, the state constitution says that everyone in the state is entitled to the minimum wage, Colorado minimum wage, if they're covered by the federal minimum wage, or if they are covered by Colorado law. With respect to whether you're covered by the federal minimum wage, or whether you're covered by federal minimum wage laws, there are lots of, in general, most medium-sized businesses, certainly any business making over $500,000 a year is covered by federal law, so all of those folks would get Colorado minimum wage. There are lots of businesses that are covered, though, and to determine whether they are covered by, whether they benefit from Colorado minimum wage, Colorado overtime, rest and meal breaks, and a lot of the other things that are sort of built into Colorado law, we look to a regulatory scheme called, what has been called in the past, the Colorado minimum wage order. Here's some background stuff on who's covered under federal law. So the minimum wage order is, what's been called the minimum wage order, is like 95% of Colorado's wage and hour law. It's all regulatory. It goes back to like I think the 1920s. It was actually, it's enacted pursuant to really broad authority that is given to the Colorado Department of Labor to Scott, but anyone in Scott's role does not have to be specifically Scott, but to protect workers. A lot of these laws in Western states in particular are really protective of, are really favorable to workers. Historically, that goes back to some of the labor strike that we had in our state, in particular in the mining industry. I don't know if people are familiar with the Ludlow massacre, but a lot of that early labor strife and early late labor movement stuff in Colorado led to these really good favorable statutes that allowed the Colorado Department of Labor that required the Colorado Department of Labor to promulgate rules that protect worker health, safety, and welfare. Pursuant to that authority, the Colorado Department of Labor has enacted the Colorado Minimum Wage Order, which provides for minimum wage, overtime, and lots of other standards, including 10-minute breaks, every 4 hours worked, and 30-minute breaks for every 30-minute unpaid meal breaks after working 5 hours. A peculiar thing about the wage order that has been in place for a really long time is that it doesn't cover anyone. In fact, it leaves out large groups of people. This is something that is a little bit of an historical quirk, and also based on what we've seen in communications with the agency going back decades from various industry players, is the result of some pretty hard behind-the-scenes lobbying for business. Labor, the interests of workers, have typically not been represented in the process of enacting the wage order. So the wage order covers these 4 categories, meaning only workers in these 4 categories of industries actually benefit from all of that stuff that we talked about. It leaves out construction, it leaves out manufacturing, it leaves out agriculture, it leaves out huge numbers of Colorado's workers who don't benefit from a lot of those critical protections. Another thing and I think this is what we want to really focus on for this presentation today, is overtime. So in general, and let me just say for who's covered under the wage order is something that we're fighting about. We've advocated for, and GBC has been super helpful in supporting us on. Jimmy came out and gave some awesome testimony on covering everyone, right? Covering everyone by these basic protections. It shocks people that there are these industries that are left out, and it's ludicrous. It makes no sense. And we really appreciate that business has been there with us, pressing to expand coverage. There's a separate issue that we've been focused on, and that can be confusing for employers, which is overtime and who's entitled to overtime. As a general matter, the rule is, and by design, going back to the New Deal, the default rule was always everyone is covered by overtime. That is a fundamental workplace protection, is a 40-hour work week. There was actually a huge fight over whether it should be a 30-hour work week. To show you how far we've come, the big fight during the New Deal was whether to make it a 30-hour work week or a 40-hour work week. And I guess business prevailed and made it a 40-hour work week. But FDR, I think there was a point when FDR was really pushing for a 30-hour work week. So, and the idea being that you can work more than that, you gotta get paid overtime for it. There are exemptions that we're all kind of familiar with, although we often confuse what their scope is. There are exemptions. So the first thing is, just because you're paid a salary does not mean you're not entitled to overtime. That's a real basic misconception that I think a lot of workers have, right? We have workers call us all the time and say, my employer treated me really unfairly, and then we ask, well, were you paid overtime? They say, no, but I was salaried, so I don't get overtime, right? That's not how the law works, right? It doesn't matter whether you're salaried or hourly. In most cases, you should still be entitled to overtime pay. And for salaried professionals, you just, in large part, it gets complicated, but for reasons we don't need to get into. But in general, you can just calculate what the overtime would be based on considering that pay to be the pay you receive in a 40-hour work week. For some salaried people, there is a carve-out from overtime. For administrative employees and executives or supervisors, managers, under federal law, we call it the EAP, and also for professional employees, the learned professionals. The doctors, lawyers fall into that category. So under federal law, we call it the EAP exemption. That's executive, administrative, and professional exemption. So you have to meet the test in order to be carved out of overtime, you have to fall within these exemptions, and you have to be paid a salary. You can see that these exemptions are pretty narrow, right? They should be pretty narrow. In order to qualify for the administrative exemption, you have to directly serve the executive and regularly perform duties important to the decision-making process of the executive. So that's a narrow category of workers that actually fall within that administrative exemption. On the executive exemption, you have to, or the managerial exemption, you have to really be managing people. You have to like actually be supervising people in order to be exempt from the overtime laws and paid a salary. So and we don't need to get into the sort of contours of this test unless people are interested in learning a little bit more. It's complicated, but the bottom line is, from our perspective, it's pretty narrow. It's a narrow category of folks who actually would fall within these exemptions. If you don't have any questions right now, that would be a good place to check in just for a second. Let me actually, before I move on to the next piece. So when Tyler will talk to you a lot more about this, but the question that the CDLE is interested in resolving now is for people who fall within these categories, right? So if you don't fall within one of these categories, it doesn't matter how much, currently it doesn't matter how much you're paid. You could be paid $150,000 a year, right? If you are not actually an administrator, not actually a manager, you're still entitled to overtime. And in fact, there are lots of cases about that, about those types of workers, right? So like in investment banking, there are lots of wage hour cases in like, against investment banks who pay employees very high salaries, but assume that because they're paying high salaries, they don't need to pay overtime. That's not true, right? You need to fall within one of these exemptions. The question is, for people who fall within these exemptions, what is the minimum salary you have to be paid? So that's we talk about salary basis. That's what we're talking about. For people who fall within these exemptions, what is the minimum salary you have to be paid, under which you would still be entitled to overtime? Tyler will talk to you more about how that's worked historically and why our organizations and many others have been advocating for a minimum salary of 2.5 times the minimum wage. I think one piece that I'd like to add here is that workers who do fall within these exemptions, like managerial exemptions, for example, are really, in many cases, these workers are treated, can be treated very badly, and be quite squeezed economically. So many of the most compelling calls that we get are often from workers who do fall genuinely, perhaps within one of these exemptions, but are just very little. So, for example, I got a call from a Denny's shift leader who genuinely supervised people, made in the low 40s and worked 70 hours a week and was raising a kid, right, and was not entitled to overtime. Many of the people who fall in these exemptions have worked really hard to try to do what everyone in their lives has told them that they ought to do in order to get ahead in the labor market, right? They've moved up into a managerial position. And instead, and many of you may know these people, they feel like once they become a manager, that's when they lost all their power, and that's when they lost all of their protections. And that's when they really felt like they got squeezed, and just where there was no limit to the amount of work they could be forced to do. And very often, and sadly, that is the case. That's why we think it's really critical that for these workers, we provide those basic minimum salary protections. We can gloss a little bit of this, but the key here is that there's been in those slides, and I can pull up the earliest wage order, which is from the 1930s. There was a very small subset of workers who were covered by these basic protections, sort of gradually expanded over time, but then really became frozen in the late 90s. And it was frozen in the late 90s when, and then at that point, when industry had, and meaning that these large industries have been excluded from coverage, it was frozen in the late 90s when there had been a lot of pressure from industry. And since then, the agency, notwithstanding workers coming, year after year and asking for more favorable treatment, the agency hasn't changed excited this year. The agency is genuinely interested in thinking through these issues and fulfilling its mandate to protect workers. So I'll turn it over to Tyler to talk a bit more on the salary basis. Yeah.
I was wondering, just before going, I'm happy to dive into it, but just if you would explain a little bit more, because I know you touched on a little bit of the duties test.
Yeah.
And kind of how the misclassification issue is occurring, and then how that relates to kind of the salary threshold.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And I think it's really critical, especially as something that should be like critically important to, especially to good businesses who are trying to stay competitive in a labor market where there might be people who are trying to skirt the rules. So the duties test without a salary basis, meaning like if you just have these tests for who might be exempt from overtime without a minimum salary that these workers have to be paid is incredibly easy to exploit, right? You can just pay everyone like 30 grand, right? Everyone in your business 30 grand and say, oh, you're kind of administrative. I don't need to pay you overtime. And you can work them however hard you want to without paying a dime in overtime, right? One of the really important reasons for a salary basis is precisely because it protects, guards against that kind of misclassification. Although, you could still misclassify people and say, like, this is, an administrative employee and I don't need to pay them overtime. At the very least, when there's a clear salary basis in place, it is really hard to pay them $38,000 a year, right? Like, like if you're claiming that someone is exempt from overtime, you got to pay them that minimum number, right? Which we hope is at $62,400, right? And it just becomes much harder to get away with misclassifying people and working them however hard you want to if you're actually forced to pay them that minimum salary, right? And I think that's one of the really key purposes of the minimum salary. Is not only do we think this is really important for people who are genuinely managers, it's really important in a world where there's just not enough enforcement, right? There's not enough enforcement of who is covered by the overtime law. And for many, many businesses in the industries that you all work in, people are paid a salary and exempt from overtime all the time, whether properly or not. I think that's a really, that's
exactly. And it's also a good setup. So.
Yeah, good.
Just before, and either of you can do this, the next slide actually is what CDLE put out to lay out the context in terms of what the question was.
Okay, got it.
From right here. So
Yeah.
just focus on it, take a second, just to set the full context. This is the question that CDLE is asking.
And we have Scott in the room. Scott, do you want at all to explain the process that you put together and kind of the responses that you got as a part of it?
I'd be happy to jump in whenever, but I think if you guys cover the substance.
Okay.
I can then talk about procedures, and be talking about procedures, so we know what it is.
So this was all in lead up to the process that Scott set up to really get larger feedback, and we had a lot of organizations engaged. So I'll do that as a teaser. As we get to the end, we can talk about how that's been going. But before heading on to the salary threshold, just to the last one of wage coverage, I think one of the hard things that even at the Bell we had a tough time doing is trying to figure out who is covered and who is not covered in Colorado. The data is so hard because we have a legal mechanism that pretty much excludes everyone unless you're included. You kind of have to fight to get included in it. So being able to define that universe gets a little bit more difficult. But this is just some of the key areas that we know are largely excluded from the wage order currently. So agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and so that just gets you to roughly around 500,000 Coloradans. I think even when we're looking at this, we were easily able to get over 1 million Coloradans in the workforce that may not be covered. So I don't want to give that number out there because we just don't know exactly who's covered or not, and that's one of the reasons why moving toward a system of presumptive coverage, you're covered unless you're excluded, is kind of a key factor there. So I'm just going to move on to, I think the key thing that David was going over was how do you actually set a salary threshold? And so what does this actually mean? I think I usually started off, and we're getting the complexity of this, of what are we actually trying to define? So what is the intent of actually trying to establish a salary threshold? And then how do we develop the different mechanisms for doing so? So going back to the actual intent when we passed the Federal Labor Standards Act, we're really trying to reduce unemployment by encouraging employers to hire more workers, and then to reduce the detrimental effect of excessive overtime work overall. And really what we're trying to figure out is how do we set a salary level that we actually think a bona fide executive, administrator, and professional employee would make. So above that range, we can be pretty sure that we're hitting someone who's an executive, administrator, and professional employee. This is different from like where do we think the key effects of this might be, or kind of who this might encompass. We're really trying to get to this major point. Who is a bona fide executive, administrator, and professional employee? And so that, I think, is our challenge, and that's why kind of we dug into different ways to kind of explore what that might look like. And just to give you context, when the wage order was originally enacted at the federal level, not the local level, it was at 3 times the minimum wage. By 1949, it had been up to 6.3 times the minimum wage, and then hovered around about 3.1, and on average, times the minimum wage up until the late 70s. And then you have this long period of time where it just doesn't get updated. So it doesn't increase for that amount of time until 2004, where it's increased to a level of about 24,000 at the federal level, which actually is less than where our minimum wage is. So if you're trying to think back to our intent of a bona fide executive, apparently from a public policy standpoint, we think executives are anyone who makes more than the minimum wage at that point. So we really haven't changed quite a bit in that longer period of time. I'll get into what's happened at the federal level in the next slide, but we're getting to this kind of key piece, which is we went from a time period where a majority of the workforce was covered under these provisions to a time period where very, very few people are actually covered overall. And so how do we come up with something new, because we're not kind of just building upon this framework of adjusted overtime, but really having to set a new threshold that represents where we should be in Colorado.
So Tyler, one quick question is, some of the numbers up here seem really high, like, you know, that $74,000 number seems really high. Does that mean that I have to pay all of my managers no less than $74,000?
No. It means that if you are under 74,000, or sorry, if you're above 74,000, you qualify for overtime. So you only have to work 40 hours a week, and if you work above that, you would be qualifying for overtime pay.
So you can still pay less than that, you just need to receive overtime as well.
Yeah. Sorry. If you make less than 74,000, you would have to be eligible for overtime payment. So you don't have to pay overtime, or you don't have to raise or increase any pieces up to that point. Sorry. Thank you for the clarification. So we were looking at different measures. So just to give you, we love data, so I'll give you some of the key data points. The median wage, that's kind of in the middle of kind of the majority of individuals in Colorado. What do they make? That is around $42,000 a year. We would expect an executive, administrator, or professional to make more than just kind of the middle of the category. And so that's why we were thinking, what is a good range above that category that makes sense? Just to give you the other facts, minimum wage will be close, as you get up to $12 an hour, to about $25,000 by 2020. So here are different characteristics. We went back to the 3 times the minimum wage, which was one of the measures of its original intent, and that gets you to about 165% of the median wage. And then if you do the 2 times the minimum wage, it gets you about 138%. So I would even say, if we're looking at executive, professionals, and administrators, these are kind of conservative when it comes to where we might actually find those different individuals from the categories. But we settled on 2.5 times the minimum wage as kind of a good increment to be able to move up, and I think a reasonable kind of midpoint between different areas. But those aren't the only options that are available. so what has happened at the federal level is the Trump administration just recently passed a rule, it's still going into implementation, that would set the overtime threshold at the 20th percentile. So 20th is the lowest 20% of earnings for the lowest census region, which is the South currently, and it looks like it'll be that way for a while, or the retail sector, and that's around $35,000 a year. So that's the current plan at the federal level to raise the threshold there. What was supposed to go into effect before that happened was the Obama rule, which was set at the 40th percentile of the South, and that started at about 48,000 and would have been increasing up until about 59,000 by 2023. Just to give you a similar glimpse, so if we were to look at our census region, which is the Western Census region, and looked at the Obama threshold, that would be the 40th percentile, and that would be about 61,000 for income. The proposed threshold, there's another way to think about it, is also to phase it in over time, so you can move up from about 1.5 times the minimum wage to 2.5 times over a longer period to allow people to kind of adjust accordingly as a part of it. And then just to give you a couple other figures, when we look at the Colorado Center on Law and Policy puts together a self-sufficiency index that's supposed to represent what does a family need to be self-sufficient in Colorado. For a family of 3, that level is about 59,000 a year, and then the federal poverty for a family of 3 is around 25,000 a year. So these are just to try and give other options that are available. Other states have been moving forward. Washington is moving their threshold to about $80,000 by 2026. Massachusetts is getting close to about 64,000 by 2024 as well.
What was the Colorado self-sufficiency?
About 59,000 per year for a family of 3. And then just as a part of this, you can read it in our comments as well. We went through an analysis of both kind of what professions might be executive managers as well as professionals. And you can see here a lot of that median salary for those groups are well over kind of a 62,400 level, especially when you're looking at even more experienced levels of those employers. So that just gives you an idea of kind of where that might rank. Any question on kind of how to set those salary thresholds? I'm going to go into how many individuals we project this to kind of affect in Colorado, but any questions before that?
I have a random. So I feel like every nonprofit job posting says exempt. Like, how does that intersect with the test? Because it doesn't seem like it would inherently.
Yeah, I guess someone just raised this for me. I didn't even notice. I think that is just, I think it's the hiring people just say exempt and then you don't get overtime. It's not lawful.
But it's like every single nonprofit job ever.
Yeah.
I think even, yeah.
I actually have a question that's not about forming it, but it's on that same topic that you're bringing up, Deborah, which is if the rule that was already in place, which barely even covers anybody, is not getting enforced, then is there any hope that this is going to get enforced with this salary threshold?
Yeah, so salary thresholds make a big difference, right? Because the salary threshold is much harder to manipulate than a system where you just say exempt, and then pays one salary, right? There is, I think sort of intuitively, and I believe, well, I'm not sure how much data you could have on this, but I think that the idea is that if you just like tell people that like in order to be exempt, you got to get paid this amount, then people are going to very likely start treating their folks as non-exempt or raise them to that amount. Now, again, you could pay people well above the threshold and still violate the law, but by paying someone, $75,000 a year and working them 70 hours a week when they're not exempt, right? But at the very least, and a lot of those cases are not going to get enforced. At the very least, right? By increasing the salary basis, right? We've ensured
one thing that always comes up for us in the overtime is like, in May, we're really busy, right? And in December, we're not. And so in these situations, like, are there any plans to do anything to accommodate some of these industries that are seasonal, where I'd like to hire year-round people, and the trade-off, like, we sat down as a staff this year, and we said, I hired 2 year-round employees, and we sat down and said, okay, if I pay you hourly, you're gonna make overtime, but then you're not gonna get paid in December at all. Would we rather level that out over the year, or do we wanna do the thing? So that's how we decided to structure it. They said, I'd like to get paid year-round instead of making overtime, because then you're getting paid 40 hours a week in December, as opposed to, like, getting paid overtime in May and not getting paid at all in December.
Totally. And so one question there, which I think is a really excellent question, is, and this came up, my wife is a teacher, and this came up in her school, where, like, a lot of the teachers were saying that a lot of the assistant teachers told the administration that they wanted to be salaried. What they meant is, we want to be paid during the summer, right? And the administration said, no, we can't make you salaried because you're not exempt. And it's true, teachers who teach like below a certain age are not exempt. I mean, that's the teacher exemption is a crazy whole other story. It's deeply rooted in all kinds of weird sexism. But a lot of teachers, some teachers are not exempt. And these teachers are genuinely not exempt. And so the administration said, we're so sorry, our hands are tied. We can't pay you during the summer because we can't pay you a salary because you're not exempt. That's not accurate, actually, right? You can still pay them a salary, and this is ultimately what they shifted toward. You can still pay them a salary. It just means that in the weeks when they work more than 40 hours a week, you've got to pay them overtime, right? Now, you could adjust it so the salary was lower, right? You could, and that would be legal, right? What they couldn't do is they couldn't pay them a salary and say, now you are exempt because we are paying you a salary, and therefore we're not going to pay you overtime. In our experience, you're totally right that there are a lot of businesses that are seasonal. I think that in many of those cases, but for these jobs, the managerial jobs, we see fewer of them, and I don't know how it works for you, but we see fewer of those jobs that are genuinely seasonal. So a lot of them, you'll have like managers will be sort of more like at that. There are a lot of big influx of hourly folks who are receiving overtime, but the sort of managers are pretty constant. But the bottom line is that you're not exempt because you get paid a salary, and at the same time, just because you get paid a salary doesn't mean you have to be exempt, right? Which is I think an important and sometimes confusing piece for people. Does that help to answer your question?
Yes and no, because what I'm hearing is seasonal industries. Because I'm not like, there's landscaping, but there's also the ski resorts, there's also the thing. I've worked in education for a long time, and the answer I got from a lot of those people is, we are unwilling to hire you year-round because we have to deal with these things, and we don't want to pay you overtime, or we don't want to deal with this thing, or there's a perception that if you're making salary, you have to work 40 hours a week. So I've been told of several jobs that I couldn't work fewer than 40 hours in the slow season, but I also couldn't work more than 40 hours in the busy season. And like one job where they were like, no, we're going to do this illegal comp time thing, where you can push these hours to vacation later, and you can take them in the summer. And I was like, I'm not participating in your illegal.
Like, that seems weird. Like,
my hours around.
Yeah.
But I do think it is, for us, it would mean I would have to hire an extra person for just May to cover office work. And then and so it becomes complicated for us because I get 40% of my business for the year in a 6-week period of time.
Totally. Yeah, there's a couple different things.
And so
one is obviously, there's a lot of misconceptions about what it means to be salaried. You can set up whatever kind of scheme you want, pay people fully legal as long as you're paying them more than minimum wage, right? Pay them a salary, pay them hourly, whatever. If you're paying them more than 40 hours for overtime. Now, when it comes to overtime, this is something that comes up in agriculture, right? Like a lot. Agriculture is minimum wage is exempt from overtime, which I think is not a good thing. But one of the arguments, that's also deeply rooted in racism, but one of the arguments had been that during the summer you have to have 50, 60-hour weeks, right? You have, so The 40-hour work week is critical, it's something we have to protect. And if you can't pay people overtime premiums at that current salary, you gotta build in a lower salary, right? And pay them overtime for overtime premiums over a certain amount. But I think that the key is that, you know, one thing as good businesses understand is there are businesses out there who do this thing where they just say, because you're salaried, I can work, you can be forced to work however much we want you to, right? Which does put, I think, folks that are real committed at a disadvantage.
I have no idea how legal this is, but the thought that I had in this specific situation was, how, would it be legal to defer the overtime pay to the flow month? And is there, I'm seeing a big nod, no, and I'm just wondering if there's some way to think about, I don't know, if there's some way to think about it.
I have an idea that you can do, if you want to choose in, you could hold money for them, like the overtime money they make, they chose for you to hold so much on the check during overtime for December or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I had in
Hold
mind.
it for them, but you have to, but if they work that overtime, you have to pay them that over, if they work over 40 hours in a given week, you have to do that.
Yeah,
But
the
the downside could be, you'd have to track, I mean, something like that, even if they allowed it, where somebody quits, you know, now you owe them
Then
money.
you give them a payout, then you pay them a payout, but, no, and literally the reason I bring it up, like, we sat down with the staff and we said, which would you rather do? And they said, I would rather get paid the same amount of money all year round. And that was the answer that we got, and that's the thing, like, I have changed jobs for that exact reason, like, working in seasonal, my experience in the seasonal industry is that the majority of people would rather get paid the same amount for you, because it's easier on your budget of trying to figure those things out. And I do feel like a lot of these things leave out that seasonal work perspective, especially your admin thing, especially in some of these seasonal fields, where you're right, you have 50 or 60 seasonal employees for every 1 or 2 year-round employees. Particularly in things like summer camps or a lot of your educational things, YMCA style things, your nonprofits.
But most of those folks are not exempt anyway, right? And they get overtime pay. So like, so it's the managers and the administrators that it would affect. Now, not to say that there aren't some kinds of roles where managers, you need more managers, right? Like I can't, you know, like there's a seasonal restaurant where you just need, it's closed during part of the year, you need like a manager to come in. And yeah, part of the answer would be, if you want to get paid the entire year, as part of our budget, we need to understand like what our overtime looks like, what our overtime needs look like. Maybe that means that the salary is a little bit lower, right? But you can still get paid the entire year. It's just that during the big months, during months where you're working more than 40 hours a week, you get overtime for that. And I feel you, and I think that I think ag is the one industry where sometimes you see that 40-hour threshold set a little bit higher, for example, it'll just be like 50 hours or 54 hours. But typically in other areas, the 40-hour work week is how we do, that's how we do business in the United States, and it's a critical protection that still applies to the vast majority of workers who are seasonal. But I'd be happy to talk to you about it more, seriously, and, you know, help you. Subject to the caveat that I'm not your attorney, but, you know.
Yeah, no, it is finding a person for a 6-week period is, like, all seasonal people, it's hard to hire. Like, you know, it takes me as long to hire somebody as to get somebody here. So, like, literally, like, I would restructure my entire business to have to do that, and I would have to train your staff to do this, because they wouldn't, like, that is part of how we work right now, and I have worked at a lot of summer camps. I worked in summer camps for a long time, and that's the same thing.
But it's a counselor, right?
You know, no, as a program director.
As a program director.
Yeah, and so, like, you have to work for those 8 weeks, you're with the kids 40, 50 hours a week, and then you have to do all of your admin stuff on that outside time. And so, those positions are kind of the same way, where, like, you are a supervisor position, so you are working those 60 hours a week, but there's not a way around that if you have to be on site for 9 hours a day.
Yeah.
Like,
So I remember a phone number, actually, the Division of Labor actually runs a call center, which is basically employees or employers can call and just get advice on something like this. So I'll just read out a number right now, because you should be called. Cheaper than lawyers, right? They won't do the hour-long consultation plus advice that they do. But, you know, for basic questions like this, 303-318-8441.
318-8441. The website has the hours. It's most weekday, basic weekday business hours, but they're closed Tuesday, Thursday.
But if you act on information that you're given on that and it's missed, whatever, if you get in trouble for something and you say, oh, I got this advice on this call line, that's not a permissible excuse, right? Like
I don't think it's because it's advice where, you know, it's a complex, what if I have this really elaborate new idea? You know, they give you basic, here are the rules. Sometimes they're clear answers, but they're pretty good at telling you where I can't take this one through real time because it's a new idea or something. But most questions we find are things that there's clear answers to. And it is, the people answering the phone though are actually the trained people who investigate claims. So it is the people who decide for some things.
And so just to be clear, David, your recommendation basically is that you that you still pay people year round, but that you would drop their salary as such to account for the anticipated overtime so that they will still be making the net amount in an annual period. It would just be not the same amount every month. They would have a bigger check and a smaller check.
I would rate that to them in December.
Yeah. Oh, no, we'll talk about it as like a collection, but.
No, but I think that, like, yeah, I mean, the key is, and I don't know, it's just, that's a very, that question is like very, very specific to the employer. There's like lots of different ways of doing that, right? And then, you're right, it's like, it's, you know, so it's seasonal, you know, it gets complicated. But I think the key thing is, no matter what, you can't just pay someone a salary if they're exempt, you know? You know, under our proposed rule, but people do that, like a huge number of people do that, right? Under our proposed rule, there would be a minimum salary in place where you'd have to pay someone in order to say that they're exempt. You know, what I will say is that when people have moved towards the Obama rule, when people implemented the Obama rule, there are lots of employers that implemented the Obama rule and stayed there. Most of what they did, this may not work for you, most of what they did with managers is they didn't increase their pay a ton. They just were more careful about how they allocated their time, you know? Because for a lot of these positions, they found out that people weren't like working that much more than 40 hours a week. They were sort of working a little bit more than 40 hours a week. They're just careful in advance about like about people's time. And for the times when they did work over 40 hours a week, they paid them OT. That it didn't make sense to, you know, increase their salary, or in not all cases could they increase their salary to the Obama level. It was mostly about adjusting people's time, or thinking more carefully about people's time.
Another question? I know you might have one. No, I'm covered. Cool. Well, I was going to go briefly over just kind of larger, just who it may affect, but if there's kind of key questions that keep coming up, please let me know, because we're happy to go in whatever direction. But just kind of at a highest level, based upon kind of just an analysis of kind of the larger Trump rule, it would affect about 105,000 Coloradans potentially moving forward. And there's two categories: people that see new protections who might be covered, that weren't covered before, and workers who have strength and protection. So what David was talking about, individuals who should already be covered, but are currently maybe misclassified as being in those positions just because of their salary. And so this would be kind of estimates on kind of right now just what the Trump rule would have at the Colorado level. The proposed threshold of $62,400 or 2.5 times the minimum wage. And just one other point, pegging it to the minimum wage is also really important, because our minimum wage in Colorado will now adjust with inflation. So having a measure that actually adjusts with something else will be key, because then we won't have to keep coming back to this every year. We may want to come back to it and say that too high, too low, but it's still adjusting over time, where we won't have to be losing ground like we did from the 1970s on. But you see a difference here where you're seeing about 400,000 individuals that may be covered underneath that, and just to do the math that you're probably all going through your head, about 300,000 individuals difference between the two kind of rules. So it would have a major effect for many Coloradans across the board. And just to highlight a few kind of key areas, just to put it in gravity here, is it's not the entirety of the workforce, so we're still not covering in some ways the majority of what we used to. but it is significantly larger than the Trump threshold. And who would benefit? What we see is it would actually have proportionally larger benefit for females, Hispanic workers, and for individuals with high school or more education over time. Some of the key areas, I'll get into some industries, but particularly kind of in health and office and administration functions, and then manufacturing. And here are those bigger categories, but you can see here the largest being health and education. Education is not teachers. Teachers are exempt under the federal law, so this is picking up on a similar piece. So this is really getting into educational support, and then really healthcare. A lot of this, we don't know exactly the job codes, but a lot of this is kind of in the healthcare supportive industry as well. And then just from the job titles, you can see a lot of it are professional related services, and then kind of sales and other kind of industries there. Any question on kind of the overall, who this might impact and what that looks like?
That was the question I came here with today, actually, was about the demographic breakdown of who is, especially who are people who in the lower end of salaried occupations. And so it looks like you've got that gender breakdown and that breakdown by people with Latinx heritage. But I'm curious, I'm surprised to not see a statistic about people who are Black in there. Can you speak to that?
I think it doesn't mean that they wouldn't be positively affected. It wasn't proportionally more than representative of the current population. But I think they very much, are a group that would benefit from this as well.
Do you happen to have any data by any other characteristics that get sometimes tracked, like people's LGBTQ status or disability status? Do you have any data like that?
We have some on disability, but not a ton. This is usually using larger surveys, so the current population survey out of the Census Bureau. So we're limited to what questions get asked in those areas. And the disability one, they do ask at a higher level, but not, I think, what we would be getting at from kind of a whole range of possible disabilities that could be captured. It doesn't capture kind of everything across the board. I don't know, David, if you want to talk a little bit maybe about the comments and kind of some of those key areas. I think parts of that, especially on the disability, has come up to some extent.
I think was there a disability rights organization comments? Is that what you're getting at?
I can't remember.
I think CCBC had somebody.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Valerie.
Really? Yeah. I don't know if I can speak to. I'm not sure if I've seen any more specific data than that. What I can tell you anecdotally is that I tend to, when we talk to people who are misclassified, salaried, especially people in like sort of managerial type roles, they tend to be people who are are marginalized, and they're often people who are marginalized in one way or another. And I think that and find themselves for lots of reasons having a disproportionately low bargaining power in the workplace for any number of reasons, right? So people who have worked in that job for a really long time, finally attain the salary position, are really critical to the success of the business, right? So are working sort of success as the employer, are working like terribly long hours, but don't have the bargaining power to get a better deal. And as you know, that bargaining power balance comes from all kinds of background stuff, right? So, but I'm not sure if I can think of if there's been more specific data.
Great. Anything else, or maybe Scott, maybe this is the time to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about the process?
Sure. So, first of all, thanks to everybody for your interest in this. In particular, seeing that, I think about at least half of you were people who had commented or participated. I remember, Jimmy, you were one of the first 3 folks who spoke at a big meeting in late August, thanks for that. And Annie, I remember your comments actually, so about, you were one of the first people who says, I run a business, and I'm good with all this. So thanks for that. And then Deborah weighed in on behalf of Good Business Colorado, so that's really valuable, because we've compiled and read all those comments. I read all of them personally, and at least 2 others did, and others had scattered, and they have them summarized, and a number of them were quoted in a meeting I had with the governor. I referenced a number of these comments, including particular business owners who are good with this. So it actually does make a difference here. I'll add just, along the lines that David and Tyler were saying, that there are a lot of reasons to revise the wage order, and among them is that the salary threshold, as David noted, it's not that salary makes you exempt, it's that you're exempt if you're a professional, an executive, or something like that. And there's a salary minimum to have you be deemed a legitimate, truly bona fide executive, professional, what have you. And when the salary is basically minimum wage with nothing else, that's not really the mark of a professional or an executive salary. Colorado hasn't had any salary, and the Trump number, and this is the point I've been making, including I said to the governor, which is that when the state has a $12 minimum wage, and Coloradans voted strongly for that, the vote failed at a number like the Trump administration's, because 35,568, the Trump administration's number, if you work 52 hours at minimum wage with overtime, 35,568 would be a violation. Right? So the salary to be overtime exempt shouldn't be less than what minimum wage workers get for overtime, as I see it. So that's one basis for revising the wage order, which is that
it can't be actually. It's not a minimum wage exemption, so it can't be actually. It's just an overtime exemption, right?
Correct. There can be a minimum wage exemption, but in general, if you get a solid enough number, something above 35,568, you're probably not getting less than minimum wage. So I'll also add that the coverage categories that David and Tyler noted, those 4 categories are strange. I can tell you right now that one of them, commercial support services, I don't know what it means. And that's because, not because I'm a fan of either of things, but it's that nobody knows what it means. And these coverage categories have a strange genesis, which is that the first minimum wage order from 1938 in Colorado covered only women and minors in the laundry industry. And it's strange, but if you go back to the 1910s, the first wage laws in the country, they were very focused on certain sectors that have arduous blue-collar labor, bakeries and coal mines and manufacturing, and laundries was a big one, actually. And a lot of it was, quite frankly, it was focused on what are things women and children do that perhaps is arduous, and we want to protect or frankly discourage the labor. And clear through the 1970s, the coverage categories in Colorado, it wasn't the same list, but the coverage categories in the 70s were beauty services, housekeeping, laundry, and retail. And they were clearly taking work done by women. Retail could be men too, I suppose, but there's a clear genderness to the categories. In the late 70s and then more so in the 90s, they were trying to make the categories more normal, just sectors of the economy that don't look like there's a category on the old Kermit TV show, like work that we think women do, right? So they ended up with strange categories like commercial support and other things like that. So there's a reason these categories exist, it's just not a good reason. Right? So, and more generally, economic and regulatory thinking has moved away from the idea that the way you regulate is you pick a couple sectors and target the hell out of them and just don't regulate the others at all. So we're moving away from that a bit. And I'll say the third reason to just rise the thing is that how many of you have read the minimum wage order referenced it? It's a hard read, I'll say, which is that there are sections that have numbers and then they have a mix of numbers and letters under it. The word unpractical appears, which is not a word, and that's a minor thing, but the point is that it's not a well-written piece of regulation. And it will say that because nobody who last worked out in the 90s was employed by my division anymore. So I'm not thinking anybody who works for me. So there will be a circumspect, but this thing needs to be rewritten wholesale, regardless of substantive change. So there are a lot of reasons that we're committed to this. As far as timetable, we're hoping to get out a draft proposed new wage order on November 1st or 4th. That's a week from this coming Friday or 2 weeks from today. I say hope because all deadlines in government are aspirational, and we'll see if that happens. But I'm really pushing for not too long because we have to publish something that puts up on the website the new minimum wage for the coming year, the $12, but also the tip wage, $8.98, and we have to amend the parts that were amended by the legislature. In that the legislature changed some employment laws this past year, and we've changed definitions. The legislature changed the definition of employee and employer. These are kind of a big deal because they're employment law. These are the people regulating them. So we have to revise this thing, and we're running up against January 1st if we go much longer. the rule starts a 90-day notice and comment process. Now, I know we've been doing a notice and comment process, but that's just to get a good bead on where the state is and get useful feedback. Again, thanks. Before we publish even a proposed rule, technically what happens is that when we publish in early November, hopefully, that sets a 90-day clock up, and the final new wage order goes into effect in early February, absent some delays or what have you, which you never know in government. So that's the timetable when it'll be in effect. Early February, we're hoping, absent delays. I'll add one other point that I think Andy asked a good question, which is enforcement. If the problem is lack of enforcement, then why does it help to rewrite the rules that are under enforced? And I say that the same will that's there to rewrite this thing and hopefully move it in a better direction is also the same will to have more and better enforcement. So it's partly new leadership. I don't just mean me, I mean that everybody who is above me in the food chain, that's Joe Gorella, who runs the Colorado Department of Labor and Employment, the governor. It's a different organization than it was a year ago. And further on that front, it's not just new individuals, because the folks in my division are good folks who are working there. We just have more hand on it, I'll add, which is that in the past legislature, we were given funds for this new direct investigations unit, basically a unit that not just responds to complaints, but stands out across the state and can investigate things. And we've just started that. We just got that money as of July. We just finished some hiring. So we're going to be doing some aggressive strategic enforcement where we know there are problems in the economy. And the bigger picture is that it's not just new leadership, it's that new funding, but also my division and CDLE generally has fielded wage complaints since only 2015. It took about 2 years to get a process up and running and then to win them down backlog. It was just a rough initiation of that whole administrative scheme that fields complaints. We think we're in a good place now in a way that the prior administration wasn't so much, and I've been on very good terms with my predecessor as director, who did amazing work getting rid of a backlog and having a really good process we think in place. And we've heard good things from workers that we investigate their claims, and we think the rulings are pretty good. But, you know, government moves slowly sometimes. It took us about 4 years to get up and running enough and then get the funds and have new leadership. So we're in a good place where we hope that reworking the minimum wage order into a much better set of regulations, both substantively and as readable rules for businesses and employees, coincides with us having a position, a point in time when we're able to do better enforcement. So that's the hope. So yeah, with that, if anybody has any questions about the process or how it's going, Jimmy?
In those things, do you find that workers are very well informed about what their rights are? And if not, would that be something with this, that there's money to put that out there for people to see?
It's a big question. I think the short answer is it varies a lot by sector. At this point, I think due to partly organized labor, the construction sector is getting better and better informed. Even folks who are not members of unions and who are otherwise marginalized, low English skill learning workers, they're coming, and we beefed up our Spanish language student staff. But they've gotten well informed. Less so in agriculture, where even though they're not covered by the wage orders of now, they do have to pay the minimum wage. And there's some statutory wage rules that apply.
Some farms have to pay minimum wage now. There's still lots of smaller ones.
Yeah, the default is they have to pay minimum wage, not overtime in agriculture. Very small farms are exempt, as are herders and some other folks. But enough agriculture has to pay the minimum that, you know, we do feel complaints, and I find that there's less knowledge there. Then in construction, there are a lot of reasons workers to be uninformed from education level, language skills, but also, you know, geographic dispersion. So in construction and agriculture, you get a lot of low English skill immigrant workers, but construction tends to be clustered in metro areas, not all, but enough that the word gets out more easily than in farms. And there are great folks doing great work with farm workers and migrant labor. It's just hard. So I think the challenges vary by sector. It varies by sector who's getting out the word. But I'll tell you right now, our outreach manager, this guy named Eric, some of you may know, he is now in the Western Slope for 3 days, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. He's probably on his way right now. Just got there. I was talking with him, and I said that we do outreach to employers, but I'd like a little more outreach to workers, which is that he's meeting with folks who talk to farm workers out there, and he is hoping to build some ties to folks we haven't spoken to before. He's in Grand Junction, Palisades, forget some other towns out there. But he has several appointments set up where he's trying to build ties with ag folks. Because again, setting aside what, if anything, happens to agriculture. In this wage order, there are basic wage rights to your earned wages, whatever you agree on, and to the minimum wage, and there are rules against unfair deductions that I'm not ready to say there's under-enforcement or under-reporting in agriculture, but that's the whole problem. I don't know, because we don't hear enough from them doing at the top, and we're trying to build that. So we're definitely trying to build that. We hired some more Spanish folks recently. Joy Sistahpreneurs, got to an año, and just trying to get up there myself. I'm not there yet, but, I'm starting a Spanish club at work to actually get more folks up to par, so we can at least do intake interviews with workers better. And the new wage order, one thing I'm proud of is we're beefing up the rules about posting a foreign language version of the wage order, because we have a posted version that covers the highlights. It has to be posted in most of our places. We have a Spanish version, but I'll tell you now, we're working on a draft rule that beefs up the requirement that a Spanish version be posted, and that if you have a cluster of non-English fluent but non-Spanish speaking workers, ask us for whatever language it is. I can't commit that we will have all languages, but hey, I grew up in New York where you go vote on election day and they have ballots in these languages. And if there comes to be a critical mass, we're hearing a Farsi or Mandarin, or, different language from African immigrant workers, I'm willing to shell out a couple $100 to translate it, and we'll have them downloadable. So we are trying to beef up the outreach in that regard, because, right, you could have the best rules in the world, right, and you would need to beef up enforcement too, but if you have the outreach, you don't know who to speak to, and you need people to trust them. But we've already gotten, just this past week, we got some really good feedback. I won't detail it, but the perspective that we haven't necessarily been, having good outreach to, we're getting folks trusting us. And we sent one of our newly hired Spanish fluent investigators, and we got his great email, just one of those thank yous, like, this is great, we haven't had this before, having this level of trust is good, we're not comfortable sending a lot of workers to talk to you. We also just passed a rule that we do not report immigration status to anyone, and we were about all inquiries. A court could order us otherwise, but the rule was put in place as a temporary emergency rule that put in effect August 20th, during even the pendency of the 90-day process. So we also have a rule about confidentiality of tips. So we're really trying to beef up in that regard our ability to have people trust us.
What I will say is that, and I think all this has been fantastic, putting the wage order aside, all the work that the agency is currently doing to this outreach is really critical. We still see lots of workers who just are never going to feel. It's not about knowledge. It's just there are some workers who just will not feel comfortable going to the government, right? And that's the current landscape. Fear ends up being a much bigger problem than understanding in many cases. But I think that's another reason why, from our perspective, the salary-based stuff is so critical, right? Because you need much less enforcement in order to make that work.
It's basically simpler. It's like, no, you don't have the salary, so you're not.
And it's much harder for any employer to get away with it.
And I don't mean to imply that, we write some rules, we talk to people, and then we get passed off here and reluctance. What you can do is, and I've had this, I've talked to immigrant workers, I've had immigrant workers hang up on me when I'm in law practice, doing Basically Davis work, but representing marginalized workers. What you can do is pass enough rules, and we now have in writing that we don't report immigration status, and we view it as retaliation if an employer reports after you file a complaint, you interfere with it. We had inquiries a couple months earlier where there's some immigrant workers who had to lead on some information, certain sector, and we wanted to talk to them. They said, "Can you promise that this is confidential?" We said, yes, but then they asked, is that a rule? I can promise. They literally asked, is that like a rule or a law? We said, no, and they wouldn't talk to us. And that's what let me go rush out of the rules section. I view this as an emergency. So what and they're talking to us now, those folks. So what you can do is convince enough people. And the plus of us having an investigations unit that doesn't have to be people filing a lawsuit is that, when we send out our investigation notices to an employer or that you reasonably believe there's a violation, we write in big bold letters, this investigation is initiated by the Division of Labor. It is not initiated nor controlled by any worker. Retaliation is therefore not only illegal, but ineffective. I don't quite say ineffectual, but we literally say that because then we can hit a sector if we get a tip. We only need one worker or a couple to give us information before we can do something. It doesn't have to be unanimous, all workers march and visit.
I would just be curious to the GDP members in the room and on the phone, just about a process that can be helpful for members once the proposed draft comes out, November 1st to 4th. We can talk about this
but I'd love to follow up with folks who express interest in this. See if there's kind of a subcommittee who wants to review it together, other folks you want to share it with, so that we can kind of correlate GDP feedback, get your input.
And let me know that the common process is already posted on our homepage, which anybody can give you if you want to find it, but, it's really just click on minimum wage order public comments. It'll be the same process once the rule is out, which is email Mike. His email address is there. It's really just send an email, right? It doesn't have to be formal. You can do a study. Tyler and David did beautiful ones with the color coding and stuff, but, you know, and that's great. It's like your elementary school report where you have a little, like, you know, binder in front of them, so they got, it's terrific. But it doesn't have to be that. You can send an email, some very powerful comments or emails, and whether it's in a report, an email, or oral on a transcript, and we will have another public hearing in December, like the August one. There are a lot of different ways to do it. The goal is to make it as easy as possible. So individual workers or individual business owners like yourselves who don't have a whole department that does your HR or legal and compliance, you know, just send us an email, weigh in, that can be just as powerful as anything.
Other thoughts, questions, ideas? Or people more confused?
I think one thing that both Tyler and David touched on, that is just to open this up in case it's helpful, is it worth walking through kind of literally what would this proposal mean for folks? Does anybody have any more specific questions? Kind of to your question, but,
Jen, I'm sorry, what was your name again?
Jesse.
Jesse. Yeah, that Jen's questions were excellent, and maybe when the proposed rule comes out, something I'd be very happy to do is, some of it has to do with the specifics of your business and the specifics of the proposal, right? So I'd be very happy to do, like, answer questions that others may have from the perspective of a workers' rights advocate. You know, again, not as a role there, but, you know, and you know, and sort of suss out some of the details, like what does it look like, you know?
And I'll add too that when we come out with the proposed rule, within a couple of weeks after, maybe 2-3 weeks, we're gonna have a fact sheet on the changes. And we're not sure whether we style as FAQ or just fact sheet listing changes, because it's gonna be too different to be a red line copy. I'll tell you that right now. Normally, when the rules are amended, it's a red line version, but like I said, when you got a set of rules where some have numbers, some don't, some have letters, some don't, and there's a paragraph you put up listing the exemptions. This is the following are exempt. Next sentence. Other exemptions include. Next sentence. Also exempt are. Clearly, what happened is that somebody just added sentences over time. But then you end up with, you know, the Frankenstein monster where you see the stitching, where they put the art on, you know, and it's not good enough right to keep as is. So it will be a new wage order. But for that reason, we see some extra burden on us. Here's going to be a fact sheet or FAQ listing the differences. So we are going to try to make that as clear as we can. And we view calling that call center as fair game. Like, hey, I read the wage order. What does the new page 4 mean? I don't get it. I'm going to try to make it, by the way. There are parts of it that are regrettably not going to be plain English because there's the like statutory construction and severability sections where there's no way to make it not legal gobbledygook. But we are running a focus group to try to plain English what parts we can, because I can't swear the whole thing to be readable to workers, but there's a big difference between it's completely unintelligible and you can basically understand it, but there's some words that are legalities that I have to include. But we are running a focus group. Regrettably, I can't invite the office and focus grouping not get disclosed language that isn't even final yet. We got to rush to final listening next week, like for the focus group. But we're getting lay people in. It's going to be people who haven't worked on this. Just CDD employees who work in another division, not going to buy them to, you know, answer a survey and stuff. So we're trying to tell, but I will say this, when we work this out, for your question was helpful. You know, weighing with opinions, but I find some of the best comments are not even always opinions, but you know what, rule 4.2.1, how can I put this? I don't know what it means. Really, I don't, or this leaves me unclear on this, because there is unintended ambiguities in any rule, or not, there really can be. So honestly, you folks as small businesses, they're trying to do the right thing, and don't have HR or in-house lawyers probably. You're actually kind of the key audience. Like people are, because if a business that I know is, when they get a comment like, we want no regulations of any kind, and we find this all very unclear. I don't know whether saying it's unclear is instrumental or whether it's a complaint, right? But if someone that basically is trying to do the right thing says, I'm honestly trying to comply, but help me with 4.2.1, then that's credible, and I need to know that. So don't think you're going to subvert the whole thing if you tell us that. That's genuinely helpful to know.
You folks on the phone have any questions or comments?
Hi, it's Judy. I just wanted to say I would love to get this fact sheet emailed to me because it's just such a great way to lay things out and to share that with other people.
Yep, we're going to post it on, we're going to do two things. When the rule comes out, we post it on our homepage. We're going to try to make the link better. Our homepage is frankly a nightmare of list of things that have nothing to do with each other. But, can't do everything once. But there'll be something that says minimum wage order proposed rule, right, on the homepage. That will link the fact sheet. The other thing is that we have a list of about 300 emails. That includes Deborah and David and Tyler, I think. It includes basically all associations or organizations that have an interest in this on both management and labor sides, or every trade association. To some extent, we're allowing you to pound it out to members. So you will get the email of the proposed wage order, and whenever the fact sheet's out, again, it'll be within a month of the proposed order. Just until we're done with that, we need to figure out what we're writing before we write a fact sheet summarizing it. But we'll send that out as soon as it's ready. So yes, absolutely.
Yeah, and GBC will definitely send it out, and I mean, if folks are interested, I can envision us maybe doing like a call to walk through and talk through the proposal, the fact sheet, what the changes are. Yeah.
And I can offer that, we'd be happy to send someone, whether me or Eric or Average Guy or someone else, when there's an event like this, just please don't ask me the week the wage order comes out. We'll be catching up and writing the fact sheet and things like that. And again, I can't swear November 1st or 4th as a soft target, but we're doing the rest.
So I have a question for you guys. Of the members who responded or engaged in this conversation that had concerns about the overtime rule, whether it was like professionals, engineering, or in the tech space and companies, it seems like a lot of it is just not actually knowing what the law is, because just because you have a programmer who's at 55K, for example, and works a lot of hours, technically that person would still be eligible for overtime as it is now, as the law stands now.
Probably for a programmer. It depends on whether that person will qualify for the professional exemption, which is complicated and requires you to have sought a higher degree in that field. But I suspect, like, programmers would probably be good. But also, like,
same with engineers, they would all have some type of
Yeah.
professional degree or license that would automatically apply to.
Maybe that's sort of complicated too, and that's why a lot of this is like specific. But I think that most programmers, I suspect, the people I know who in programming wouldn't qualify as exempt, no matter what you pay them. I think, but this is all like one of the things that I want to do, and this is something we've been doing in the nonprofit space as well, is to be able. We want to be able to have these conversations in an open, candid way that is also like non-judgmental, right? Because this is hard, complicated stuff, right? And I appreciate that if you're in this space, you're trying to do the best you can. So I'm very interested in having those conversations with people, to help, provide them with my perspective, but also to hear out, what theirs may be or where they may have questions. But I think that, yes, a lot of concern comes from overuse of the administrative and managerial exemptions.
How have your conversations been going with like the nonprofit association and nonprofit organizations?
Pretty well so far. I think that to the extent that people have been using, there have definitely been people who have said, "Oh wow, when we gave this presentation, I'm definitely not paying people OT who probably should get OT." Depends on whether they're covered by the Fair Labor Standards Act. I mean, there's, every business, like, every employer is a little bit different. But what we've heard from many people on the nonprofit side is, for lots of folks, what they'll do is they'll think harder about people's time, right? And I think that's a hard thing to do. Trust me, as like a manager, it's often really easy to say. I think this is for many people why this happens. So I'll pay you a salary, you get the work done, let's just not talk about your hours, That's really easy, and I totally get it. I think that, one thing that our overtime laws force us to do is think a little bit more carefully about people's time. Something that comes up for me all the time go to that meeting, or you don't. And as you know, in the nonprofit space, there's a lot of meetings, right? So we're like careful about sending people out for meetings, for coalition stuff, for you know, and I think that, I don't know, you know, I was going to say, like, you know, the people who work for me say that they really appreciate that. Of course, they're telling their boss that, so I'm not going to use that line. Employers just say, like, oh, you know, but I think that's what our law, you know, from my perspective, you know, the 40-hour work week is really important, and I think that I hope that it helps me become a more careful manager.
I have a couple of thoughts about what would be helpful.
Totally.
Especially as you kind of brought us back full circle to the idea that when you're getting at individual cases, it can be fairly complex to see if you actually, you know, under which category you actually fall. But I think what could be helpful, especially thinking about the Business in Colorado community, is like a level up from the complexity. Like, what are the philosophical goals we're trying to achieve here, and how can you opt into doing the right thing even if you're not required to? Because for a lot of small businesses, there are exemptions to say, like, well, even things like FMLA, right? If you have less than 50 employees, you're not covered by FMLA, but you probably want to do something nice for your employees when they have children, or, you know, want to give them paid time off and things like that. And so I think something that would be helpful just to get above the technical requirements is to say, yeah, who do we philosophically feel like should have to work more than 40 hours a week and not get paid any extra for it? And then, you know, why? What's some good reasoning for that? And then for everybody else, here's how you could, you know, comply with the standard, the proposed Colorado standard. And you could even say, you know, as a business, I'm not required to do this, but I feel like it's the right thing to do, and that's what I'm going to do. So I think that just bringing that conversation up a level to the philosophical pinning would be helpful.
I also have a comment. When I started getting emails about this conversation, I think what interested me was that I feel like I'm a small business, so I'm not in a position yet where I have any salaried staff. However, I look at this more as to like the worker side of things, specifically when we're talking about people of color, immigrants. I would love to be involved in figure out ways and how we can disseminate this information to the worker side of things. I know that this is more of an employer side of things, but as I am growing my business, I am taking these steps and learning this so that when I get to that point, I'm aware and I can make a decision based on information that I have. But I see this more immediate for me, being more resourceful and aware in a way where I can bring this information to industries who would benefit from knowing this information in the worker side of things.
Sorry, one thing I'll add on that front is that I know I appreciate you not putting it this way, but there is even an interest in you, a food truck. I think you said 2 employees. 6 employees. 6 employees, sorry. But you know, to some extent, you're competing in places that they pay minimum wages and not pay overtime or what have you, right? So it's good to get out the word. It's basically, they're never looking at trouble about it. Yeah, exactly. You get a level playing field. Exactly. You don't want to be punished for doing the right thing. So I think there's value getting out the word, and it's good that you say that. So I'd say that when we come out with it, I'm very big on the posters. Laser posters. Look, bigger businesses have a break room or this and that where it's posted. But I'm trying to write regulations to make it a little more 21st century where, you know, if there's a handbook or a manual or policies, whether printed or online, the wager has to be part of that wherever it is, whether it's online or what have you. So hopefully it's something that can be, you know, the link can be sent really easily. You can just text it, email it, whatever, so it doesn't come see a poster, right? It's there, here's a 9-page document. So we're trying to make it easier to get out the word, absolutely, and have it in different languages and whatnot. So yeah, I think the short answer is that we want to read legislation how to get out the word, because, you know, just the big food service, that's an area where there's almost no union penetration. So it's harder to know how to get the word out than, say, in construction where, yeah, maybe barely 10% union penetration, but there's a bit between 10% and almost 0, because there's somebody getting out the word. So yeah, absolutely.
So that's kind of where I was thinking too, is how important it is to get out there, because you're talking about enforcement. Well, part of that is finding it. There's lots of people who are workers who go, wait a minute, we're not doing this right, or bring it to your attention, you can get something done quicker, more quickly leveling the playing field, because a lot of employers won't know, but sometimes, you know, they're not looking very hard either, or here's something, they're gonna just act like they did, or whatever the case is, but if it comes up with their employees, things will change fast, and it will level the playing field for those of us who want to do things right.
I think that, you know, I know every now and then they say, you can send a link. I sound like the old guy who just discovered the internet, which I am to pretty many people. But the point is that, you know, I'm very big on if we find a violation or we, you know, find some community needs to know stuff, you know, I've already been talking with the folks on PR shop at CDLE, and they're very interested in, just to take something outside our area, we're talking about here, ban the box, new law about not asking my criminal record up front. You know, we got about 10 complaints the first month or so. We haven't ruled on them yet, but once we get a ruling, I think we should put out a release and blast it out to tens of thousands of employers who are on CDLE's list, saying, hey, you know, this is a new law, and there's been found to be a violation. A lot of these are inadvertent because employers may find a job application online and Google it, and maybe one that's from another state that doesn't have these rules. We're not trying to punish employers for the first violation, but everybody should be aware. You know, use violations of stories. The other way to use violations is that if we find that there's a sector in which some subcontractors found to be committing violations, well, it sounds like I'd like to email or contact or send a notice or an information request to all the businesses we can find that might do business with subcontractors and say, have you done business with this man, right? And send it out as an information request, because then for one investigation and one finding, you get a lot of bang for the buck, because you've told everybody you're on it. Because the goal is, and I was talking to the folks in other states who do enforcement, the goal is to make it, you can't be everywhere, but you can make it look like you're everywhere. Right, by any one investigation, talk to a lot of people about it. Sometimes it's public release, sometimes it's contacting a lot of businesses that deal business to business. So, you know, in that way. So we said, let's say it turns out you were you know, horrible owner of your graphics business, right? And we find there's a terrible set of violations by you. Well, if there's a kind of, I sit there thinking, what's the kind of business that we're just calling custom styles? And then I might send them 50 of them information requests. Have you done business with Jimmy Burrs of Color Graphics? If so, answer these sworn questions under oath about your dealings and how much you paid and what you received the services. And that would render it kind of a pain to deal with somebody who was a violator and acting bad faith. And we don't only do that when there's a genuinely bad act. Not a technical violation, but we have some of those. So, you know, if every one genuinely bad actor, if you get a genuinely bad actor that does a lot of business-to-business dealings, that lets me contact 50 other businesses that are probably bigger. And using you as a service provider in my bizarre world, Jimmy, was the opposite for you. And then, you know, we've told businesses, watch out, there's a problem ahead if you deal with one of these bad actors. And that partly addresses the problem of the drywall where that gets undercut by the bad actor. We can make it, you know, difficult to deal with bad actors.
I have a question too, on like the tracking of all this. So it was actually news to me that, was there a slide that said like meals and breaks are unpaid?
Meal breaks can be unpaid, the 30-minute break can be unpaid, so the 10-minute break is paid.
Okay, so how do business owners, I was thinking because we recently had a meeting with a business that's probably not a good fit for GBC, but they mentioned their contention with the possibility of a minimum wage ordinance being brought about to everybody was the break piece of it, that piece of it. So just plain devil's advocate.
So their concern was with this state website?
Yes. I mean, like, our members universally, pretty much every single person said, we think everyone should be covered by the minimum wage ordinance. This particular company.
This order, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, yeah, the minimum wage, the only reason, minimum wage ordinance is the Denver minimum wage.
Sorry, state one.
There's a lot, yeah.
But the question is, like, if they had some legitimate, like, how does a business prove that they are doing the right thing? If there's a, you know what I mean? Like, are they to be tracking break time? And for small businesses, that's a lot of.
Well, you're not clocking in and out for your 10-minute break, because you're getting paid for it, you know? Then there are some rules that will be triggered if it's like unfeasible for the 10-minute break to happen. Right, Scott, there's like, I forgot exactly what it is.
Yeah, it could be a different time, it doesn't be in the middle of shift. One thing I say is that if you're up in a crane,
Yeah.
There's no requirement to have a time clock. Now, that gives a lack of records, but if an employee puts in a claim that I didn't get a break, any employee is willing to break the proof. You're the one filing the claim. So if there's a lack of records on something that isn't required to be in a record, like when was the break given, the employee has to prove it. As a practical matter, we get surprisingly few disputes about whether a break was given. It's more about whether we couldn't or something like that.
Yeah. It's totally unfeasible to give a break during an entire shift. There's sort of a little bit, but typically it's feasible at some point during the shift to give a 10-minute break. It does not have to be in the middle. It does not have to be at any given time, and you also don't have to clock it, right? There's no record keeping requirement for when that break.
Okay, so that would be the answer. That's not really a legitimate reason because there is no record keeping requirement.
If that's what the concern was, then there is no. Yeah.
That would not be a legit reason.
In our case, I mean, it would have to be somebody complained they weren't getting their breaks. I imagine these guys do an investigation, talk to other employees, and then otherwise they go in and go, no, I don't get them either, I just never complained. And then they find out that was wrong, right?
Right, we like to be pretty confidentially, we do our best to. And again, your example, I know you're running a crane business, but just an example, if the answer is I couldn't give him a break every 4 hours because he's been cleaning for 6 hours, well, the premise of the break period, the rest period, is actually not good to be in the crane for 6 hours.
Yeah.
Right, so like, it's meant to actually stop that. So, and there are, like, there's flexibility, it's a break every 4 hours, it doesn't have to be smack in the middle. So we're not saying there's a limit of 1 hour 55 before you get a break. There's flexibility about the when, but you can't go multiple 4-hour shifts with that break is that either.
Yeah, like, we handle that with my employees because sometimes we're at recovery all day, sometimes we're at recovery for an hour, like, they move all over the place. And so our actual rule is take your breaks however you want, you're paid for your 8-hour shift. We don't do an unpaid 30-minute break. They're paid for that time. So I don't make them clock out, but they're like, my requirement is that you take the amount of breaks you need for health and safety reasons. Because if you're shoveling rocks in the sun, like, they probably get an hour break a day because I don't want them to die of heat exhaustion.
Yeah, and that's great, and that's all that an employer would be required to do. Like, you're not required to like bring a time clock to the work site, right? Like, all the employer is required to do is say, take your break. That's the law, and we want it. It's good for us. It's good for us. It's good for you.
Well, thank you all.
Yeah. Thank you. Grab some food on the way out.
Yeah.
Grab some cookies, but I'm having some kind of like weird insulin thing. I had like 3 cookies and now I'm feeling like a little shaky.
I had 2 of them, I thought that was
my heart a little, yeah.
And before we officially wrap, is there anyone on the line, on the phone, that has any additional questions while we have the expertise of Tyler, David, and Scott in the room, or anybody else that has any final questions or thoughts? Thank you, Amy, for giving your thoughts on what would be most helpful. So anything else for our members on what would be helpful for us to support with either enabling you to weigh in on the rule prior to being revised, after being revised, or understanding how to make sure that that our businesses know are able to be compliant about. Anybody, any thoughts, any additional thoughts on that? What would be helpful, useful?
Well, this is Judy, and I just want to say thank you. This has been really, really educational.
Thanks, Judy.
Nice, Judy. And again, our homepage now, the Division of Labor Standards and Statistics, has a link right on it that says minimum wage or public comments. So, the process for that, again, we're in now, we're on November, because it just transmogrifies into a comment on the actual proposed rule as of November 1st or 4th, but it has an email address, just send an email to Mike, his email address is there. And the comments are publicly posted, by the way, but that's for everyone's benefit, because, we don't want, I like that I can say anything said substantively to me. I report what meetings I go to, we have a list of those, we're gonna attach as our public rule documents. If anything emailed to me if it's substantive, you post online, if somebody didn't seem aware that will be done, or just email me, I respond with, hi, 2 options, we want to post this publicly, so all information sent to me, or delete. And to their credit, nobody said, delete, I meant this to be private lobbying, so, everything's posted, about 138 comments and counting. It's gonna go up, but it totals up, we counted 371 people, have commented, but really somewhere over 400 would include the multiple signatories, so it's a lot of people waiting.